When you hear the words genetic mutation, you usually think of a zombie movie or a sci-fi flick where the creature is inhuman and malformed or disformed in some way. Those are pure fiction, but messing with genetics can cause some pretty bad side effects. Genetic engineering is one of the most risky procedures that science has come up with in the last few years. I want to work in the genetics field after I graduate, and so this is an important topic for me. You should also stay informed because in the future a doctor may try to push a procedure on you that is risky and even experimental. There are several problems with genetic engineering. It can cause major crop contamination and health risk. Not only that, but it is often very harmful to the animals that they test it on. This could be cause dangerous mutations or psychological effects on people that genetic engineering is used on. Grad students in the University of Delaware have recently done a study on genetic engineering that showed several side effects that should keep it from being a widely used procedure. One of the major problems would be if a virus had attacked a genetically modified crop. Because the crops are all basically clones, they would all be destroyed, thus eliminating any produce that the farmer would get from these crops. Another bad side effect would be if the crops were to breed with local plants. This type of contamination would be hard to recall because you cannot get genes back that are no longer found in these plants. According to Paul Arnold, this could lead to the elimination of certain unmodified plants altogether. Another property that genetically enhanced crops have is that they are often bad for helpful creatures like ladybugs, butterflies, bees, and earthworms. They contain a toxin called Bacillus thuringiensis, which is poisonous to these creatures, and if they die, then they would get eaten by other creatures, thus killing larger creatures, and as the food chain goes up, it would destroy more and more animals in the area. Dr. Kachana Karasom wrote about an even bigger concern in the Pacific Rim Law and Policy Journal. She wrote about what she called a superweed. What would happen is that a genetically modified plant would start to grow out of control, but because it is enhanced, the weed would be next to impossible to destroy. It has higher pest resistance than most normal plants, so native plants would be destroyed in the process, thus eliminating environmental diversity altogether. The Food and Drug Administration requires very little monitoring of these modified crops. The only regulation says that companies must tell people if their crops have been modified, but there are no safe testing required. The health risk of eating modified foods are completely unknown. People's deaths are certainly not worth the money it saves to make this new food. Food is not the only thing, however, that could cause health risk. By changing DNA, we could create diseases that would destroy the entire human population. There are no long-term studies on genetic engineering, and it would take several lifetimes to be sure that there are no adverse effects, thus making it next to impossible to predict any new side effects. The next big issue would be with animal testing. According to Linda McDonald Glenn, genetic engineering has devastating effects on animals, creating malformed animals with no chance at a normal life. They could be born without limbs or a part of their brain, and even if they were born with a normal body, the testing the animals endure would be painful and unnecessary. The animals are forced to live in labs and be mutilated, poked, and prodded for the rest of their lives. Also, many of the animals are born to be organ donors for humans. The risk of passing on disease is high, so the human would be in danger. Also, the animal would have to give up its life in order to give the human an organ. Finn Orfano says there is one process in particular that could be very dangerous and risky, and especially uncontrollable if it got out of hand. Scientists have been trying to treat bacterial infection with viruses. Now, these viruses will be more effective than traditional medication, but there is a very real risk of the virus being passed on to someone else. Once this happens, the virus would try to attack a similar bacteria in that person, but the bacteria, instead of being destroyed, would be mutated. In the end, a superbacteria could be created, which would not be able to be treated with medicine and would end up killing millions. This is one of the very dangerous mutations that occur. When it comes to altering human genetics, there's a very slippery slope. The technology is in its infancy, so it would be very dangerous to experiment on humans. Many scientists think that humans born from cloned or altered DNA could have shorter lifespans or be born with mutations. There are great concerns that there would be psychological harm to children. They might feel like a less of an individual or less loved. It would encourage parents to pick out exactly what they want, and the children would now be seen as property or objects. Children who would be born normally might be shunned because they wouldn't be as gifted as others. But by picking out specific traits that they want, parents would essentially be taking a child's choice away, and they would no longer have an individual child, but more a clone of every other child that exists. It could cause severe psychological damage to the child's health that might never be fixable. Overall, the risks of genetic engineering are too dangerous to consider. We could create super viruses and super weeds. Natural diversity would be eliminated, and the environment would be polluted. Millions of human lives are at risk. Children could end up with incurable damage created by their parents. There are too many unknown risks to make it worth messing with. If we take genetics into our own hands, we could be damaging the future beyond repair.